Welcome, Mr. Phil.
Hello, how are you, brother?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome. It's a real pleasure to be here. Just let me know if the audio is no good or anything like that.
You are loud and clear.
Perfect.
So, let me just welcome everyone to this first of our Perseus conversations. So, this is going to be a podcast which goes a little bit wider than what we do over on the Perseus Arcane Academy blog. So, as well as the magical and the esoteric, we are covering wider things such as the martial arts, different traditions, meditation practices, the weird and the wonderful. So, Phil, first of all, can you give us a brief introduction to who you are and how you got here?
Well, thank you so much, James, for this opportunity to sort of share a little bit about myself and my story and that. And I want to say what an honor to be the first, as you've mentioned. So that's very kind. So thank you. So essentially about a decade ago, I was a professional guitar teacher and I was working in many schools and I was running a large business. And I got a bit burnt out, a high demand job. And then I started exploring some things that I read Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock. A friend gave it to me years before. And guitar was the coolest thing after my corporate job. And I was doing it for a job, teaching and playing. And I got burnt out and I was looking for something else. And so I started using YouTube for things other than watching funny videos. And I thought, I'm not interested. I want to find something I'm interested in. So I started exploring ancient civilizations, and that just was a rabbit hole that led me into, truther stuff, conspiracy, UFO, ancient civilizations, all of this sort of thing. And then I ended up coming back around to meditation. And I discovered and I'm sure some of the listeners will be aware of this particular school called Heart Math. And they had what they call a quick coherence breathing technique, which essentially activated the heart, and there's a vagus nerve connection and et cetera. And it's very powerful, very interesting. And so I just sat down and started doing that. And that was in about October 2014. So almost 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And, and I'm having this really interesting experience because essentially I was just doing I was exploring all of these techniques and things. And I just really enjoyed this process. It's very interesting. And, but essentially what happened is that I do this thing and then I just sit back on the couch and just enjoy the sensation that you have with this protocol. And then I remember, I just sitting there with my eyes closed and I just started watching my thoughts. And I was like, this is quite interesting. I'm just really chilled, relaxed, sitting back, watching my thoughts. And some interesting things started coming up. And what do you know? 10 years later, now I'm, I really enjoy the Franz Bardon material and that first exercise, which is to sit there and watch your thoughts rise and fall away. And it's really interesting. So I've been doing that for quite a while. And that was a good, that's a very important, good practice. But, after I was kind of at the same time doing the meditation, I was also exploring lots of other topics. But in early February of 2015, I went to a conference at a spiritual meditation retreat center in Taupo in New Zealand, the Tauhara Center. Some of your listeners may be aware of it. I think they get a few international visitors there. Beautiful, beautiful place, set in an amazing setting. And I met some very interesting people there, had lots of very interesting experiences. There were naturopaths and scientists and doctors and people from and spiritual teachers. And it was a very tight little group, but there was a keynote speaker there that some of your listeners may be aware of called Dr. Bruce Lipton.
Yes.
And it was a very private setting. There was only about 50 of us in the crowd. And basically, I ended up getting some one-on-one time with Dr. Bruce in the car. We were going down to a local sacred site that it's a bit controversial, but it looks like there's a brick wall in the middle of the forest, and it's called the Kaimanawa Wall. And I'll upload a video of that I made to my YouTube channel, which I'll give you some deets for later. But anyway, there was this young Austrian guy there, and he was quite interesting. And so anyway, I'll bring this background. So what happened is that my friend who went to the conference we went to the Bruce Lipton keynote speech, and he compacted his 6-hour speech down to 3 hours, and everyone walked out of that just heads were spinning, man. And my friend had a wicked migraine, and I'm there trying to comfort her, and people are trying to help her out, and I was playing a nice bit of guitar for her, and she was just in massive agony. And this young Austrian guy comes over, and he says, "Can I try something?" And he puts his hands over her head, and in like 10 seconds she looks up at him and goes, "How did you do that? The migraine's gone." And I'm like, well, isn't that interesting? So anyway, I start talking to this guy, and what do you know? Turns out that we're birthday twins. And I thought that's pretty fun. And then we're talking about things like the Bosnian pyramids, and the all the UFO, all the usual suspects as far as the topical material goes. The big wide world that I was that I was just getting into. And he introduced me to Russian contactless fighting, and he gave me some demos as well, where I was basically unable to get him up off the floor. And so that was my entry point into things like Empty Force and Ling Kong Jing, I think it is, and these types of things. And I, basically he said, give me I had a memory stick, and I gave it to him, and he just filled it full of stuff. And I just went home and gorged it all. And he gave me some, because I was really fascinated by the energy healing thing. Because for me, it was like, well, this is something that you can share with others. And coming from a customer service background, I thought, well, this is perfect. I can teach people how to meditate and that. But on top of that, this is like an objective form of metaphysical or esoteric practice that you can share with people for their benefit. And I just thought that's awesome, because not everyone wants to learn. Some people want stuff done for them.
Absolutely.
And it's very interesting. And so straight off the bat, I started learning I dived straight into energy healing after that. And I was having all the success to start off with. A friend came over, and she had a thing, and I downloaded this free book or something, or a cheap book off Kindle. And I did the mental gymnastics. She's lying on the bed. She's got a sore, lying on tummy. She's got a sore like thing between her back. And I'm just like, okay, well, I'm just going to put my hand on your back here and abracadabra and whatever's going on, and doing the thing. And then the next thing, she's like, oh my gosh, it's moving. And I'm like, what do you mean? She says, it's moving out the side of my shoulder. So I'm like, okay, well, the book says to follow it. Okay. So I'm following it, and the knotted or the pain, it moved out, and then it just went and just popped out the side. And then she's like, oh my gosh, it's gone. And I'm like, going, that's really interesting. And so straight out of the gate, I started hitting people up and saying, hey, look, have you got a thing? I'm looking for some willing victims here. And yeah, I was just getting a lot of great success, and everything was quite surprising. And then I just kept learning and exploring, and I found myself gravitating towards sort of modern teachers rather than traditional ones, I guess you might say. Like, and so I've got a big list, and I did a lot of, and then I also went and did a Reiki course. And I was so fascinated, and I was so done with my musical career. And some people still can't believe this when I say I sold all my guitars and stuff to go do Reiki courses.
Wow, that's love, isn't it?
Man, I tell you, and I have no regrets about it. And I had beautiful equipment too. I had high quality equipment as a muso, and but this thing.
I've got a quick question about the Reiki.
Yes.
I mean, because obviously there's a lot of people have heard the term. I mean, and I, back a few years, I mean, what more than that now, probably 2 decades ago, I used to see it, and I used to think, I'm not so sure, because there was amazing practitioners, and then there was kind of like what looked like just wishful thinking. So how do you ascertain, in terms of the teachers that you went to, who really had something, and how does the quality vary between the different Reiki teachers?
This is such a great question, and one that's been very close to my heart, because I've done a real deep dive with Reiki over the years. I've read a lot, and I've, I guess, you've got your experiential knowledge that you gather from the practice when you've got people on the table or you're doing things with them. And then you've got, obviously, the written material and the stories that you hear. And for me, I was like going, well, I mean, as far as energy healing goes, Reiki seems to occupy a popular pocket of that sort of understanding of energy healing. So people talk about Reiki, and then there's so many different branches of Reiki, right? So as far as, and I'm always a bit careful when I go into this because I've got a lot of brothers and sisters out there that are practitioners, I should say, of Reiki. And, you know, I think what it comes down to is that it comes down to the ability to demonstrate some level of skillfulness and proficiency, which is person comes in with X problem, sore shoulder, heartbreak, scattered mind, whatever it is, that just some base level of issue, or they just want to get on the table and get a Reiki session for whatever. So if I keep this Reiki centric in regards to your, to answer your question, what I'll say is this. It's, okay. So what I have discovered is, after reading all these books, listening to all these people talk, and going to Reiki classes, and my teacher, she's very well known, and she gets pretty amazing results and things like this. However, what I will say is that generally speaking, majoritively, largely, Reiki, when it is taught to people, is not taught to them as a daily practice. Okay, it's not taught as a cultivation practice. It's generally like a one-stop shop workshop type thing. And it's like, you go learn the symbols and the precepts, hand positions, and then they might talk about chakras. And so that, there's lots of other things are brought in. And so I was like, well, who's the best researchers on this? Where's all the source documents here? Because, the story is that the guy was wanting to have Mikao Sui was wanting to have was wanting to connect with the divine. He was after an experience. And so he was already a healer. There's all these myths, so I can go into them, but essentially, just to keep on track with your question, because I can wander off here, but essentially, he went up the mountain and he went on a retreat and sat under the waterfall, as the story goes, and he fasted and he had a universal mind experience. And then he came down and he stubbed his toe or ripped the toenail off or whatever it was, and it stopped bleeding when he put his hands over it. He was still buzzing out from having this experience. And then he came down and he was trying to tell people about the experience, but they had no frame of reference, or they'd only heard things. As we know, there's some things that are very hard to verbalize and bring into intellectual language, but reveals itself to be quite limited when it comes to having certain types of experiences. And so anyway, he's like, the tavern owner's daughter had a sore back. He puts his hands on and it bang. So he's got in my understanding, he's got an elevated capacity for, and proficiency for energy healing. So now he's a better energy healer because of this experience. Maybe he's able to bring it through cleaner. But after studying all these other energy healing practices and techniques, I've done a fair bit of comparative analysis, and I've discovered the underlying denominators. But back to your question about, like, how do you ascertain? Well, I got a mate, as far as I know, he doesn't do the practices regularly, but he's also he does a sport, which is where he so one thing he does is he does Reiki a lot. You can basically open yourself up by doing a lot of the actual hands-on. Like, you can get good at it just by putting your hands on, right? The other thing is that he does a sport where he has to balance a lot. And so he's connecting the tissue of the body, and this type of thing, which we know in Qigong is, basically connecting the mass, right?
Yeah.
So, but what happened is that at some point, especially when it migrated over to the West, it became very focused on symbols. And so, but in the original teachings, you would go to the dojo each week or every other day, and you would sit with the teacher, and he would take you through the precepts, chanting, Qigong. And the best researchers I can find say that the symbols came later. He didn't get gifted these symbols out of the ether and the mind experience.
It's like an add-on.
Yeah. So what happens is that when you're teaching people, because there's a story where he went out into the streets and he's holding a torch, and he's basically wanting to help people, and all these poor sick people came to him and he healed them, and then they went back to doing stuff that got them in that position in the first place. And he's like, okay,
lifestyle over.
Exactly. And so anyway, so he's like, okay, well, let's start up a school then, because then I can find people who are willing to, basically get more nodes out there, because there's some people that will be helping. So he wanted to share the teachings. And so what he was doing was he was essentially trying to reverse engineer his experience in a way. And it's still a little bit gray for me, but when I parallel and line it up against, say, the initiation into Hermetics framework and by Bardon and including Sifu Mark Rasmus, and that's helped me a lot to understand.
That's actually where I was going next. Actually, that's actually where because in terms of healing with Reiki, I have very limited experience and knowledge, but I know a lot of people that since working step 3 of Franz Bardon's initiation to Hermetics, all the work in the appendix there, kind of, if that was the line they wanted to go down, had quite an impact on their healing methods. Whether that would just be energy balancing, whether that would be, bringing it into the massage that they do, but they're using the skills and the ability from step 3 appendix work. So again, I know it's a very hard thing to compare, but how would you say it differs from someone working? And of course, we're not saying better or worse. We're just saying how different. They're all good in themselves. So, what, if anything, is different in what is happening between a Reiki approach to working with a problem shoulder and a step 3 practitioner of Franz Bardon's using the vital force and their will on that shoulder?
Okay, man, that's a great, and it's so well poised that question, brother. Thank you. Okay, so right, so essentially what Reiki has become is that it used to be more like what you'd find in step 3, because you're doing cultivation practice, and like in the early stages of Reiki, you're doing this thing. Basically, it's pieced together. It's like, if you look at the Bardon material, he even says, he mentions other traditions, right? Yes. He mentions things from other places in the world, and these are a collection, and it's a framework that he's put together because he's found underlying shared principles amongst traditions, and he's just removed the cultural dressing, right, largely, right? So what happened is that, like I said, some point Reiki went from being a cultivation practice where you're doing a qigong and you're doing chanting, which is, an affirmation / vibrating the fascia or the water to vibrate the fascia to connect you with the subtle levels, I guess. It creates, I'm still learning about chanting personally, and that, because I didn't really get into that side of it with Reiki, and not many people do, to be honest. It's become a symbol-based practice, and which has essentially turned it more into an egregore type practice. So you've got Reiki cultivation, and you've got Reiki, which is more symbol, which is the probably 95% of the population. So when you're talking egregore, you're talking about everyone's feeding into it, or they're doing the Chicken Little or the Little Red Hen. Everyone wants to eat the bread, but no one wants to help bake the bread. Do you know what I'm saying? So everyone's siphoning out of the reservoir, but they're not putting back in, or that if they are, but people don't necessarily understand the metaphysical mechanics behind even like one of the beauties of the systems of Reiki that sort of gets, they hang it on the wall, but they don't practice it regularly, is that they have a set of precepts there. And precepts are very important, as we know, in these practices, because they provide us a safety net so we don't, because if you're like in Reiki, they say, do not anger, do not worry. That covers a broad spectrum of emotional states as well, potentially. And like, if we look at our black and white mirror, that's like, oh yeah, well, that's pretty obvious. If you're going to be a healer, you don't want to be rocking into a healing angry and worried and stressed out in that. You don't want to be, because Bardon talks about that in step 3. It's like, you don't, people can pick up your stuff and you can pick up their stuff. And so he says, basically pack yourself and let your vital force radiate. And you're basically just going to kind of, you're going to wipe your aura on them almost, like it's
basically,
like, yeah. So, so one of the things that people don't know about Reiki is that one of the practices, and this is probably just as well in some ways that people don't know about this, but there's a practice in Reiki that exercises the electric and magnetic lines of force. You essentially learn to trace lines down through your hands, down to your lower dantian and back again. It's called Seishin Toitsu. And but
I
what
did not
that
know that.
right, not a lot of people do, right? It's in Franz Bardon. I've done plenty of videos where I've shown this off, but there's a book called the Reiki Source Book. It's one of the best books on the topic, very well researched. And it's got these practices, Hatsureiho, which is like the gathering of spiritual energy. And one of these practices is, but it traces lines down to your lower dantian. Now, ideally, you don't want to use your own internal energy storage, like your natural native energy storage, like to heal people. If anything, you want to use the environment, because then it's not coming through you, you know. And so, but some of the modern understandings of Reiki is that it comes in through the crown, out through the hand. So, you know, like it's universal life force energy. And, you know, when people tell me they see the color purple a lot on the table, I go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe I am just being like a hollow bone or a conduit for, you know, the higher force, so to speak. So it's not just mental, astral, physical level. Like Mark Rasmus might talk about, you know, like in his Qigong healing, he'll say, you know, like if it's the vital level, you hurt yourself yesterday, and so we can fix it up. If it's at the astral level, then we need to move into that first transformational process and use astral into the astral state of mind, because we want to essentially take the life force out of it, because it's developed a personality. You're revolving your day around this injury, and you're starting to identify with it. It's almost not quite a sentience, but it's like got a bit of a thing going on. It's got more to it. And so, but with Reiki, it's pretty passive. Person shows up, they get on the table, you might sort of think about the symbols, and yeah, you do the thing. So, I mean, sorry. Yeah.
No, sorry, Phil, to cut you off. To sort of build on what you just mentioned there, because yeah, that's a good point. Like with the way Sifu Mark goes through. I mean, I suppose that would be taking it as the free releases, right? Or as the free transformations. Yeah. So do you ever bring that in? Do you bring that into the table and guide someone through that as a part of your therapy? Would you bring in the free releases if you feel this problem is not at a vital level, that it's actually an astral or mental thing?
Yeah. So, okay. So what happens is, right, when you've got someone on a table, okay, you know, they're lying there, and if you don't know them, then you've kind of got to get to know them. And so one thing I've heard from a few of the practitioners is, especially if you're in like you're learning to develop your ting or your listening skills, you might have to, you know, touch hands with 1,000 odd people to get the 300 roughly odd energies, become familiar with all these different energy signatures. Now, this is all sort of still new territory for me, and some notable sort of practitioners have mentioned this. But as far as like you connect with someone, right, and you're trying to feel them, you just start off with clear sentience. You just try and pad or cup the space above them and try to get a feeling. And then in Reiki, they have this too, actually, but nobody talks about it. Well, they do, but yeah, you generally learn how to build the ball, but that's about as far as you go with that. But you learn how to, you do this thing called biosen, and you learn to scan the body and feel for fluctuations. And so that's a starting point. So you're getting to know someone. Now, if you can bridge into them, like, you know how you can float people, right? So you take their hands and you release. And I mean, I was pretty lucky. I figured that out from watching Mark's videos. I had to watch them really closely.
You're a quick learner. Yeah, gosh.
Man, I tell you, bro, I was so dead keen to figure this out, and I just watched and listened and listened to all the subtleties. And then,
I was there for a week, and I was slow with that.
Well,
the first time.
Well, I found out that, you know, like some people are really hard to float, and some people are real easy to float. And, you know, and I was able to provide these people with these interesting experiences, and I took notes and this. And it's funny because some people were really easy to float, but they didn't really seem to get much when they were on the table, even if they had a sore thing. But I think what happens is that sometimes they come in with a sore thumb, but the energy, that just gets them in the door. But there's actually other areas of their life that need attention, because what caused the sore thumb? Is it mindlessness? Did they whack their thumb because they're not paying attention? You know, and so when you're doing these things, and so if you back to your question. So what I do now is that I'll have the person on the table. If I can't float them for whatever reason, I'll put them on the table, and I'll basically put my mind into their field and move around, and then just sort of listen or look for subtleties and things, and then just look for registers, and just say, sometimes I keep it real quiet. Normally I'll do like 20 to 30 minutes of just like no talking, anything like that, because you want them to get really relaxed, because they all generally come, then most of them aren't meditators, so they have busy minds and they've come from something else. And if they're able to settle down, then the energy is less diffuse. It aggregates, and it's even after all these years of doing it, I'm still learning about this stuff. But essentially, what I'll do is that I will do the 3 transformations, or normally just even 2, for them, and sometimes they will have quite a tangible, palpable experience. They'll be like, "Whoa, what was that?" And I'm like, okay, sweet as. So I'm doing it for you. And because you can do it with them standing, but doing it for them on a table, their center of balance, their balance is different because they're on a table, they're lying flat.
As soon as they get to the astral level, they're going to really feel that slow down and get into that deep.
Exactly. And if they're all sort of frizzed up and scattered and frustrated or anything like that, the first port of call is basically to get them to close to some level of equilibrium as possible, because that's a large part of the thing. Like, it doesn't mean they won't get a healing outcome. Like, I try, if I'm doing what I might call street healings or battlefield triage, like, somebody I know and I'm comfortable enough and confident enough to say, "Hey, look, man, you've got a thing, you should come and do this thing. 10 minutes, man, 10 minutes. They sit down and see if you get something from it," because the lady down the road, she got something out of it. And
Phil, the street Reikiist.
Yeah, right. And it's hard to tell, but sometimes it's the next day, sometimes it's within half an hour. Sometimes it's an infection. I had a bro who had a knee infection and it wouldn't go anywhere, and I did a healing on I did a treatment on his knee, and then he felt something. He's like, oh, something got his attention, and the next morning he woke up and it was gone. And he's like, holy crap. And he said to his missus, "Oh my gosh, he must have healed me." And then, of course, he was like all excited. So he went back off to the gym, and basically now the infection, he aggravated it and it spread all up and down his leg. He would have been better just to do the rest and recuperation thing. So, you've got to know these things, because people can have quite a profound initial experience, but from my experience, it's like, well, the healing process, once it's engaged, it needs to be supported. And one of those things you do is that you don't go put the body, once you've basically, because I kind of feel that the vital energy or the stuff, that whether it's astral, mental, whatever, it's intelligent. It's got its own intelligence. It's got a self-correcting nature to it. And for me, it tends to lean towards harmony and evolution. As at a base level, it's got a base level of nutrition. Now, some of it I think it's a programmable medium too, obviously, and Bardon talks about this. And you can go to places like, Willem Reich, Freud's heir apparent. He talks about orgone as opposed to, say, vital energy.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
And he also talks about dead orgone, basically pathological forms of energy in certain places and that. And so, I've got to say, I've done such a wide search on all this stuff.
Wow. Very interesting, Phil.
Yeah,
you need to write a book.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, man, the more bums I can get on seats and get to know what's going on. I mean, I have to say that, Sifu Mark's modern translation of the Bardon material and his years of experience. Like, I don't know Mark personally. I've emailed him, and I know some of his students. I've got some of the bros locally in that. But I've been following his courses, and I watch a lot of his YouTube stuff. And one of the things that I found is really important is to develop your clairsentience. It's perfect for healing work, man. Like, it's so, like, people want to get, everyone's clairvoyant apparently. And I'm like going, wow, that's awesome. I'm not, sometimes I get a glimpse on the table.
Yeah, I think it's on and off, isn't it? Much more than it is. It's quite a a skill to get like a switch, but we can get flashes increasingly so. But to make it an on and off skill is tremendous, especially without a tool, crystal ball or something like that. It's pretty hard. Let me just go back now, because you just mentioned Sifu, Mark, and let's look at the Bardon material. The Reiki stuff, I think we could probably do 6 hours on. This is amazing. So I suppose for more material on the Reiki, if people are very curious about that, they can follow your YouTube channel, right, which I will list below for them, because I'm sure you can have lots of material there. So in terms of the Bardon material, there's a few, what I would say, gateposts. The vacancy of mind, the transference of consciousness, and the depth point, that I would say are sort of key points in the Bardon training. And also the visualization as well. Depending on how close your bodies are together, it might be easier or not for you. So let's look at each one by one and your approach. I mean, with the vacancy of mind, you said with the Reiki, you were used to doing that stuff, right? It probably came quite simply for you.
So what's really interesting is that I got introduced to a particular author who's studied under Gershom Scholem as a Hermetic Kabbalist, and I've befriended this man. He's written many books. He's trained Navy SEALs, he tells me, but he's written all these books on magic. And he has a book called ESP Induction Through Forms of Self-Hypnosis. He's a physicist and he's a magician. And he introduced me to a set of exercises in that book, guided meditations. And it turns out that the first one you learn is essentially vacancy of mind. And so I called it void mind or blank mind. And I kind of already had that skill because, if you do that first exercise, which is watching your thoughts rise and fall away, the vacancy of mind is like, all you do is just kind of shift your attention to the empty space, the gap that starts to form, right? So
natural consequence. Yeah,
absolutely. And so, and that blank mind state, or the void mind, or the vacancy of mind, is actually quite a pleasurable space to occupy, especially when you've got a really busy flippin' mind like me, right? So. And it's curious, because when you hold that and then you release it, sometimes an image or something will pop in and it may possess some kind of relevance. So this particular chap developed a 10-second protocol for Marines out in the field, and when they reached a fork in the road, he basically wanted to give them a, do you go left or right? Basically, how he framed it was to keep it not woo-woo. He said, we want to increase your ability to make correct guesses. And I like that. There's ways of phrasing things so they're not,
good phrasing.
Yeah. And I got to say, language, that's a whole other topic, but even how you talk to yourself, right? But so what happened is that you would impress yourself with a question, and then you would hold it like a single point concentration on the thing. You would phrase it, and then you go into blank mind, and then you would just pull back a little bit and it would pop up, sort of thing. And wonderful. So I had some training in that beforehand. So when I found that in Bardon's book, it was like, because I understood that the road to Akasha, it's very much reliant on your ability at an early stage to be able to basically quieten the mind. And, being able to feel the muscles in your mind being able to just keep an empty space, and these types of things, like you're kind of feeling like little mental palms or hands pushing things away, and just it's almost like it's pushing on
the distance there, wanting to come in but they can't. Yeah.
And so you're maintaining something, and I feel a pressure with that. And so that was the vacancy of mind one. So I had pretty early success with that.
So from there, I've probably the next gate for lots of people. This was especially myself, because generally, I don't know if I can say generally, but there seems to be a distinction in people in whether they are an image thinker or whether they are more of a conceptual thinker. So there are some people who are just very much a natural, they're like, oh yeah, I can visualize very easily, always have. And there are other people who they close their eyes and it's just a black void. You say pink elephant and it's still a blank void. So which one are you, and how did you approach the visualization practice if it was a challenge?
Yeah, and this is ongoing for me. I mean, I've got a pretty vivid imagination, but I don't have like a super plastic one, but what I find is that I found that dream recall was very handy, because as you are kind of turning the screws to remember dreams in the morning, you are going back into your memory, doing recall, and you recall it, and it kind of unfolds. And so,
I know exactly what you mean. I used a similar method from Muni Sadhu's book.
right. So what happens is that if you are able to conjure up even a glimpse of an image in your mind, congratulations, you've just done visualization. And all you have to do is just get your foot in the door and just kind of stretch it open a little bit. And what I've found is that even Bardon says this, it gets a bit longer each time. You can hold that image a bit longer.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like you can start at one end, like you can start with pictograms or basic things, which is really good, like tracing patterns, symbols and things like that, and just like you basically got a sketch-a-doodle thingy in your mind, and you just
Absolutely, and I can etch a sketch.
yeah, that's it. The other one is using like fireworks sparklers and doing that. And so what you're doing is that you're creating an interface, like a chalkboard that you hand between yourself and whatever it is that supplies the images, or and you're creating like a handshake of like, okay, well, you write on this, and then I'm creating this this drawing board. Essentially, I'm impregnating it. I'm creating something, the software or the firmware or the hardware sort of thing. Now, but yeah, what you and you can come at this from two ends. You can come at it from the very simple thing of being able to hold simple images, or you can start off at the other end and just be walking down a beach, feeling the sand between your toes type of thing, and smelling things and that. And sometimes that might be easier because you're essentially kind of painting the image with the various sense gates as you go, or painting the vivid experience as you go. And I think I found that bouncing between those two things, they kind of find a point in the middle where I get some stability of a solidified image. So on one hand, I'm doing the hardcore drills and reps with pictograms and through basic line drawings and having an image in front of me and then closing my eyes and holding it. And the other one, I'm just like chilling back, relaxed, and going, man, that memory of seeing my nephew born when I first got to hold him, or and Mark talks about this too. Pick something that's got an emotional connection with.
Absolutely, yeah, that has something meaning to you. I mean, that's what you mentioned. A key thing there is I think there's also a distinction, or I've made this distinction in my own practice in between just freshly imagining something, and remembrance.
Yes.
So there's these two. They're both essentially resulting in the same end result of an image, we hope. But there is a creation of think of an object, and you're going to create, I don't know, a yellow sphere. Okay, I don't happen to have a yellow sphere memory, so I'm creating it.
Yeah.
But or think of your cat or your dog. You're remembering it. So there's these different things and have a different vital, so I suppose, association depending on how strong they're going to be.
Yeah, and I think too, like there's ways, being a teacher, as a music teacher, I find so many transferable analogies and ways of learning. We're learning how to explain things to young kids, like bringing things down to their comprehension level. You're noticing that they only have a certain width of vocabulary and attention span as well. They've got limitations, but if you can, so if you treat this new capacity that you're developing within yourself like a small child, right? And say, okay, what we're going to do is we just want to aim for very simple, short success. And so I just go, okay, I'm going to picture, for example, like a yellow sphere or a yellow circle, and I'm going to pulse it. I'm not going to try and hold it there and like really, I'm just going to pop it in. I'm like, oh, there it is. And then what I'll do is that I'll pop it in and pop it out. And then what I'm doing is that I'm activating that thing. I've got an on and an off. I'm bouncing between two things. I'm creating a polarity of a thing and a not a thing. And so what happens is that it's kind of like you're flexing the muscle and you're releasing it. Flex, release, flex, release, flex, release. And you're getting good at two things, which is intent and release. And then what happens is that you intend a bit longer. and then you release, and you turn a bit longer. And so you start pulsing this. And I found this to be very useful because essentially, because you want to compound success. And so if you just have repetitive success of just having this image flashing, so to speak, and then you can flash it longer, then it develops a confidence of a type resulting from a type of achievement, because you're trying to get your fingers around it so you can do it more and do it more proficiently. And so you make it easy for yourself. And
those small wins.
That's it, bro. It's small wins. Perfect.
Oh, okay. Well, let's what are we now? Okay, so we got about 15 minutes left on this episode. So let's move on a little bit. Let's cover the depth point, and then I want to look at, before we go, I want to look at some of the exciting stuff that you've been doing in how you're working with Kabbalah, how you're working with it in kind of the musical approach before we go today.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. So as far as the depth point goes, so the first one is obviously you learn to transfer your consciousness into an object and to sort of like move it around inside it, and your mind becomes the object. So it's about developing this mental flexibility. And so the first thing is that you're introducing yourself, baby steps into this concept of basically taking your consciousness and putting it in a thing or merging it with a thing. And then what you're doing, and you're exploring it, like you're kind of meeting a new skill kind of halfway. So there's some familiarity with the concept, and you're also like, well, this is actually kind of weird and crazy at the same time. But I can kind of see, like, if I put my mind inside a tennis ball, I've maybe seen inside a tennis ball, or I don't know what's inside this one, but I can guess, and I can kind of actually feel like my mental space is like inside of a tennis ball. And then so what happens is you get this thing about merging with something as a very easy thing, and you use easy things like spheres and cubes and stuff like that, right? And you're learning how to flex your mental space into different shapes. Then with the depth point, what I found with that is that it's almost like you're trying to poke a hole or stretch open reality, in my view. Like you're trying to go down, right down, and then there's a kind of a pop or something that happens. And I had to think about this. And when I heard, and I'll just keep mentioning his name, because for me, he's probably he's one of the best, right? Mark talks about essentially like, you come at everything from the stillness, from underneath it. So when a kid plays guitar and they're not very good, they're all got their shoulders up and they're holding their breath and they play a sound and it's okay. Once they do it more and more, they relax, and then the actual music comes out. They've found the stillness within the skill set, and it's the same thing, right? So you just keep doing the thing, right, and do your best to try and relax into the idea of what you're doing. Now that can be a hard thing for some people to process, but if you do this enough and the other things, you will notice that at some point, whatever exercise you're doing, you experience a kind of a relaxed ease, right? When you can do something, you relax more. When you learn to drive a car, you're not like, over checking. You're just on autopilot almost. So with the depth point conversation, like, it's like, well, what is he saying? He's saying, well, your mind's you're drilling down towards a point. Everything's getting bigger and bigger. And at some point it becomes the whole universe. And so you take his descriptive language and you do your best to relate to it, and then you just keep doing the thing and going, well, what would it be like if I was in the universe of a banana? Like, what would that be? And it's supposed to be just like a giant, empty, infinite space. And it's like, well, I mean, this is why you've got to do it with other things, so you get contrast. And I did this with the trees. I go out into the trees and I'll go to one tree and I'll hook up into that tree. And then I'll go to another tree that's a different species and I'll notice a difference. And I'll go to another tree that's the same species as the first one, and it's the same but different. And it's all about contrast. So if you're doing depth point, pick two or three or four very different objects, very easy to kind of conceptualize, I guess, like just familiar things.
I think that's a really good point, because the depth point can seem, especially at first, very much, you kind of go and you go, well, what's the difference between this? This seems exactly like the same point that I did yesterday. on a different object. It's almost like you're entering the same place, but it's that there is a subtle difference.
Yeah, so your ability to perceive like whatever it is, you know, everything's got its own very unique signature, I guess you could say, or its own characteristics and attributes, properties, and all these types of things. And how you experience that will change. And so if you've got 3 or 4 different items and you just put your mind in each one, right, and you go, huh, you know what? When I put my mind in that one, what sort of descriptive language comes to mind? It's like it's flowery, or it's spiky, or it's like this or like that or whatever. And then the other thing's more like this and like this. And so you write these things down, just like you're at a whiskey tasting, right? You know, this one's got oak tannins and this one's sweet and peaty or whatever, blah, 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 blah. And so this is where the journaling is really important. So when it comes to the depth point, you're just going, just think about you're going in deeper, 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 deeper. And, you know, you're trying to crack into something. You're going as deep as you can. You know, you're finding your way. And as long as you kind of just keep burrowing down and down and down, and you experience things moving outward, or you feel like reality's being ripped open. I mean, these types of things.
Well explained, Phil. Very nicely explained. Wow. So I think that answers that one, but perfectly. Okay, let's move. Lastly, then we've about 8 minutes left, Phil. I'm sure you can fit this in to discuss your approach to, because I know you've been doing a lot of research. You've been posting some things up online in terms of your discoveries, which I think is a kind of a unique approach, and you're very much your own approach to the Kabbalah work of Franz Bardon. So you just want to give us a brief summary and overview of that, where you're at with it?
Okay, so the KDQ book for me has, I had a big love for Kabbalah back in the day, and then I was in groups of people and they were all telling me it was bad, evil, wrong, and I'm like going, well, I'm not sure about that, but I kind of just lost interest. And then the Bardon book came back up, and the Bardon book came into my awareness after playing around with the Hermetics book for quite a while, and I was like going, oh. And then I was watching a 60 skills video, and he was talking about, this is basically just the developed 3-point concentration from the first book, and some, just to paraphrase it vaguely, and I was like going, well, so I just started exploring the thing and reading it and just watching more videos about it where I could. And obviously the 60 skill stuff is just fantastic and very generous too, and giving you ways to do it. And I just started instantly, straight out of the gate, was having interesting experiences. Wow. And I was like, yeah, it does require more effort. And, my concentration has come a long way since I've been doing them. And because it ticks a lot of the boxes in the Hermetics book, the exercises, and so, so what I found is that as I was sort of spent more time doing it and doing longer and longer sits and playing with it, I was like going, well, I need to relate this back to things that are, relatable to me, because I can see how valuable it is to re-language it or recontextualize it into a modern sort of setting with something that I can think about. And so when I thought about it, each one of the 3 bodies, this is the same as in the first book as well. Each one of the 3 bodies, you're schooling them to do certain things. Now, if I was going to make a machine, if I was going to put this into a machine language, or into the context of like a big thing with dials on it, or put it down to like a guitar pedal, it's like, how would I do this? Well, I mean, I want to click. If I want the letter L, I want that green, that specific green. I want that sound and that pitch, and I also want that feeling. And so I would have a thing, and I'd dial in this, and this, and this. And so I was like, well, then how would I build that? Well, I need to have all the presets of those things. And so I was thinking about it like, how I'd build it. And that's the kind of the metaphor I'm building, or the analogy I'm building on my YouTube channel at the moment. I've got a video up there because I found that when I do this, I think for a lot of modern thinkers as well, Western minds especially, although no, to be fair, that's a pretty broad spectrum, but relating it back to an everyday kind of thing has helped me to sort of group and organize and categorize information so that it's easy for me to sort of reference in a fast point, because I'm good at remembering things. And as a teacher, people learn things in different ways, which is why there's Reiki symbols and Reiki chanting, which are they're based, they're associated with each other. So as far as bringing the guitar in goes, that one's still a little bit on the back burner. But one thing, obviously, when you're doing any kind of letter work and you're doing pronunciation, is that if you're going to do 462 reps of a letter or a combination, man, you're probably going to be tired after that. Like, I could get up on stage and play guitar for 3 hours, but get up and sing and play for 3 hours, man, that's a whole nother ball game, when you're using your vocal cords and your capacity. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm probably going to start teaching Kabbalistic aspirants from the KDQ family, help them develop their vocal cords, because I'm a singing teacher as well. And so, it's not so much about using it's like it's building up capacity so that you can do it, because a lot of people will come to this and maybe they haven't done any chanting or vocal work, and there's ways of doing it so you don't hurt yourself and you can do it for long periods of time and these types of things. So it's about building the supporting muscles. I think I can bring that to the table because I love this. really love the Bardon community and all the associated material. So I'm like, this is something I can bring to help people out. And I just love this Kabbalah stuff, because back in the day when I started exploring, more like the Dion Fortunes and the Gareth Knights and all that stuff, I mean, I was having extraordinary experiences just from reading it and looking at the tarot associations, and it was like, there's something in this. And now that I've got this Bardon stuff, and he relates it, but it's not specifically Hebrew type of thing. It's just catapulted it to a whole new dimension that I couldn't comprehend before. And it's like I said on that video, man, it's rocking my world. And so this is my focus. I'm tending to use this as my healing strategy now. The more I become comfortable, I mean, I don't even have to think about anything when I do Reiki healing now. It's all kind of
automatic. Yeah. Wow, Phil, perfectly explained. Really good. We probably need about 5 hours, but we're coming to the end of this one. We can always do another one.
Absolutely.
Do you have a website up yet?
Not as yet. At some point it will be philrice.co.nz. But you can catch me on Facebook on a personal profile. I also if you can't find me there, go to my YouTube channel. You can search for me at Phil Rice NZ, N for Nelly, Z for zebra, and PHIL, and I'll give you the link anyway.
Well, we'll put it all down below, no problem. That's great, and I can always update when the website or news socials come up as well. Okay, well, so I just want to say thank you very much for so clearly and wow, just way better than I could do on all those subjects. Really clearly explaining them all and your approach and how you've gone from one to the other and now come out the other end with your own approach to the Kabbalah. So really nice to hear. Let me finish this off now, and we should have a little chat afterwards.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And brother, I'd be more than happy to jump on anytime. And I'll just get everything I've got for everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you, Phil.